All right, we are live for the Commenting on Writing to Coach Revision workshop. I'm here with Matthew Pearson.
Hi, Jen.
Hey, Matthew.
So we're going to probably wait until 5 after just to give folks a chance to log on and get going. But we did want to go live as soon as we were ready, just to give people a heads up that we will indeed be starting shortly. So looking forward to doing this. We'll get going probably in a minute at most.
Yeah, and if you do want to join us in the Hangout, send me your Gmail address. You can put it in through the Q&A, and I will send you an invitation. The invitation you'll see from your Google Plus page. All right, I see Gloria is here. Hi, Gloria.
All right. There's Anne again. Good to see you, Anne. Recognize her.
Erin's here.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we've got a few already.
Excellent. All right. Shall we do this?
Yeah, let's do this.
All right, excellent. Go ahead, please.
So you should see a link in the email that I gave you, but also from the Google Plus page where this event is happening, to a Google Drive folder. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you so you can see what that folder looks like. Here we go. Looks a little funky right now, but this is the folder. You have some sample drafts in there. If you open them up, you'll be able to find one with your name on it. And then we also have this handout, which is a PDF. So if you'd like, you could either download it or just look at it. But we have an agenda on there, and we'll be using it sort of instead of a set of PowerPoint slides to help our presentation along. And also that has the activity, so if you're unclear what the activity is, you can reference that handout. But I'm going to go ahead and introduce myself. Unshare my screen first. I'm Jen O'Brien. I am in the Office for Teaching, Learning, and Assessment, and I help coordinate this workshop series. Matthew, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Matthew Pearson. I am the Associate Director of the University Center for Writing-Based Learning. Many people know the Writing Center that's under our jurisdiction, and we also do a lot of work with the Teaching Commons and Jen and her colleagues on helping faculty teach writing or use writing in teaching. So this is the second of a two-part series to start the academic year off, focusing on engaging with student work. And so the first one last week, which we provide a link to below, Jen will talk about that in a second, focused on using rubrics to grade student writing. We figured we would start with that. And then the second focus that we think is an equally important, super helpful thing for those of you who are teaching writing, if you feel like that's a big course learning goal for you, or if you're using writing to teach course content, if that feels like a little bit more important than teaching writing itself, or both, of course. Today's focus is commenting on writing to coach revision. And we have an agenda today that it should be, like last week, we hope pretty hands-on, and we're going to try to respond to any comments from anyone that joins us in real time in the Hangout itself, or last week, with the help of a colleague here at the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment, we were able to take questions via the YouTube link, and that was something that we really enjoyed hearing from all of you. Feel free to also use the Q&A box in the Hangout itself if you're able to access that. So the agenda, if you can see the commenting on writing handout PDF that Jen mentioned, the agenda itself is going to go back and forth between about 4 specific strategies for commenting on student writing to coach revision, and then to put those into practice. So before we dive into any particular strategies or concepts, did want to say one thing and then also then jump to hearing from you all. Like our workshop last week, for anyone who joined us, we will be spending a good amount of time at the very end, the last half of the workshop, doing a lot of hands-on, putting together all of the principles that we're talking about today. So that's something just to know and to look forward to, because the advantage of this space is that we can really take the time that we have set aside, but also use the tools that the Google Docs provides us to do what we think is some cool real-time practice on some of the principles, and then also sharing that practice, getting some feedback and all that. So anyways, look forward to that. And one thing I want to hear from folks about, if you haven't already chimed in, is what opportunities you all give students to revise their writing. So if people want to chime in via the Q&A link or the comments on YouTube, we are looking forward to hearing from you all. Jen, how about you? You want to start off while we're waiting for comments to roll in?
Sure. Well, while people are submitting their comments about the opportunities that they give students for revision, I just want to go back to the idea of formative versus summative assessment. And for those of you who were with us last Friday, we talked a little bit about this, and I promised that we would talk about formative assessment today. The last workshop focused on summative assessment. And that distinction between formative and summative assessment is that formative assessment is for when you do give students opportunities to revise. You're giving them feedback that will help them improve their work. So it's during the learning process. Summative assessment happens at the very end, so that's more of like a final project that you're grading, or a final exam, if we took an example that was not writing related. And so last week we focused on summative assessment, and our main strategy there was using a rubric to make grading easier and to also justify a grade. And then this week we're focusing on the formative, which is typically a low stakes. So you do formative feedback when you give out an assignment and give students the opportunity to revise.
Indeed. And one of the things that I generally do, most of the courses I teach are about writing, but not all of them are first-year writing courses where teaching writing skills is the most important factor. But for the courses I teach where I'm not teaching writing skills per se, I still like to build in revision. I still think that's important. I don't have the citation ready at hand right now, but I do know that there's, this makes sense commonsensically. There's a lot of evidence that unless we build in revision as instructors, that a lot of what we're reading is a first draft. So I think that, there are enterprising students who will go to the Writing Center or share their work with their friends or read it themselves. But I think that, building in time and building in requirements for rough drafts is something that I think, especially for high-stakes assignments, is really valuable for those of us at the who teach at the college level. And so anyway, so I just think that, I try to give students chances to revise their work on anything that I think is high stakes, including, in one of the courses I teach on a midterm where I have them do real-time writing in class, and then because I really want them to solidify the concepts we cover in the first 5 weeks, I give them a chance to go back to the readings once they've done it. And I feel like that's a pretty useful way to make sure that I can intervene with any misconceptions or lack of core concepts at that point in the quarter. How about you, Jen? Do you build in revision? Do you let students revise anything that they want to, or how do you approach it?
So I always look at an early draft of writing, and I don't give a grade on that first draft that I see. But for those of you who don't do it that way, or maybe don't give formative feedback on all assignments, specific types of assignments that could work for this are, the early drafts. It could be an introduction paragraph that includes a thesis statement. It could be a proposal, a research proposal if they're working on a bigger project. These are really great ways to give students feedback early on in the process.
Indeed, and we do have a couple awesome comments here already from Anne and Karen via the Q&A. Anne says that there's 9 written assignments, and then students get a chance to do 4 of them. They get a grade, and then they can revise it for a 1 to 10% grade increase. So that's a good way of that already builds in. And one of the things that we'll be talking about today, which is the idea of applying the feedback that you offer to students directly on the assignment itself, because we feel like there's a lot of research that shows that transferring feedback from one assignment to the other is much more difficult than applying feedback you provide on a particular draft to a future draft. And then Karen talks about peer review and provide some instruction to have students talk about style, flow, grammar, etc. So that's great. Those are both excellent approaches.
Yeah, and it looks like Judy, she also does in-class peer review on written drafts.
Yeah.
So that's a good time for students to get that formative feedback, even if it's from each other and not necessarily from the instructor. A lot of what we say today in this workshop is going to be applicable for when you lead these in-class peer reviews. You can actually give students this advice so they can use it to comment on each other's papers, especially the genuine praise piece that we're going to talk about, and minimizing and prioritizing.
Excellent. So we can maybe put anything else in context, any other comments, Jen, but should we go ahead and start talking about some of the core strategies that we're going to advocate for today?
Yeah, let's jump right in.
Sounds good, because we want to make sure that we just, give everyone time to really practice these things. So the overall structure of what we're going to do for the next, 40 minutes or so is talk about a concept and then try to use one of the 2 samples that we provided to put that into practice. We're going to hold off on the second sample until we do everything together at the end. But, one of the things that I really found influential on my teaching comes from Nancy Summers, who's a really good empirical researcher of writing in the college context. And though the study that we cite on the second page of the handout, it's pretty old at this point, it's really solid methodologically. She looked at a lot of actual student papers with teacher comments on them, and she found a range of things. But one of the things that she found that teachers did too infrequently, but that when done well was very influential for students actually making revisions, was to dramatize the reader, is what she called it. So you can see her, I think saying it in really lovely way, that when we comment on student writing, we're trying to hold a mirror up to them about how you, or all of us as interested, knowledgeable readers, how we are making meaning or failing to make meaning from the words they provided us. So one of the things that, and then the goal there is the more that students, or the more that anyone can predict what readers might need, the better they will be at writing. And I think that that's definitely true in my own growth as a writer, just really trying to scrutinize drafts for, okay, what am I assuming, what am I leaving out, what am I not effectively predicting about the reader, what am I how am I telling the reader too much, not trusting them enough? So that's something that I think it's super useful. And the ways to apply that, we'll see a couple examples in a second. The ways to apply that are really just to quite literally articulate your experience reading. One of the things Nancy Summers talks a lot about is how instructors in her research do a lot of appropriating of student writing and also offering comments that are not text specific. So obviously as instructors, it's okay to, it's a good thing to push students towards certain standards or how to achieve the assignment that you've provided them or how to master a certain genre, all that kind of stuff. But if all we're doing when we comment is tell them what they did right or wrong, we're not giving them any information about the consequences of the moves they made other than in the logic of how successful they were on the assignment or not. So in other words, pointing to instances where expectations were met or not met, why they were met or not met, and the effects that has for you as a reader. Couple examples below before we take a look at the Bean quote. And it's just real literal, and I'm sure many of you already do this, but students do report that this kind of commentary helps them know when to revise and also motivates revision. So in example 1, the comment that's dramatizing the reading is, I like the metaphor, but the way this is worded confuses me. I had to read the first half of the sentence a couple times before I understood what it meant. So you get a real literal description of, I had to read this a lot. And then, a writer who cares about expressing what he or she is trying to express would not want a reader to have to read something so many times. And then the second comment, I found the sentence a little vague and wonder if it's necessary given that the next sentence is super clear and still could be a nice topic sentence. So the second sentence is a little more combination of dramatizing the reader and offering a suggestion, but still there's a description of the vagueness and what that meant, and then also a quick suggestion to the writer about what to do about it. So anyway, so I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on this or any questions about it. And we will be talking about, Judy has a good question that actually is going to lead us into our next section about the volume of commenting. So if just know Judy, we'll be talking about that in a sec. Jen's going to be talking about minimizing and prioritizing in a sec. But anyway, the Bean quote that we provided there, I think also just says it nicely about the commentary as a personal correspondence with the writer, something that makes your own thinking visible and permanent. And I do think that it takes a little bit longer to do this than it does to just sort of put comments that are only evaluative, but that will, again, will relate to what Jen's going to talk about here in a sec. So let's, if people are up for it, if you have questions, let us know. But what we'd like to do here, and then with the next few strategies we talk about, is actually go to a sample student draft and try to provide a marginal comment that shows how a particular passage impacts you as a reader. And so those are in the folder.
Matthew, would you like me to show how to get there?
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you, Jen.
All right, so I'm going to do some screen sharing.
Awesome.
All right, so I'm here in the folder, and right now I'm looking at the handout. So I'm going to click out of that, and then we are working on sample student draft number 1. If I go in there and find the one with my name, it'll open up, and you'll see the assignment there. And then if you scroll down, the sample of student writing, and how to the way that you make a comment in Google Drive is to select this and the comment, and you'll be able to write a marginal comment that way.
Mm-hmm. So that's what we'd like to do. And then and Judy chimed in saying that one issue that she's had with the dramatize the reader commentary is when we don't tell students how to make things better, but just only observe our reading of it. And that's exactly why I provided that second example. I think some mix. It really depends on your learning goals and where you are in an assignment. But I think there are opportunities for if one of your goals is for students to have a lot of ownership over the texts they're writing, then I think more of that mirror holding up without suggestion can be more appropriate. But if it's more about mastery of a certain genre or there's certain discursive skills or moves that you want them to make, I do think that providing both the dramatization of your reading and suggestions for how to do that can be helpful. And then also one of the things that, again, Jen will talk about in a second, is balancing particular instances of dramatizing the reader in a marginal comment with then explicit suggestions for revisions in a summary or end comment. So if people are game for it, there's a do you mind sharing the folder real quick? So in sample student draft 1 folder, everybody should have a document with your first name on it. I'm going to open up mine. I should be able to share my screen too, Jen?
Yeah.
Let me try that real quick. All right. Got it. You opened up Gen O sample student draft 1, yeah, and I'm opening up Matthew. So the goal here, we provided you in this sample and also the next one with a little bit about the assignment if folks want to look it over. But we'd like folks to take, I don't know, a few minutes to look through the sample student writing draft 1. It's pretty short, and take a few minutes to provide one marginal comment where you're just holding up a mirror about your reading of this particular draft.
And just one thing to note, so this is coming from a sample draft from something my students wrote, and this is a class that had international students. It was all international students, mostly Chinese. So you'll notice that the writing is exemplary of a second language student.
Uh-huh. So I'm going to try, Jen, if you want to, I'm going to share my screen real quick if you want to swap me out with you.
Sure.
Thank you so much. I'm just trying to hold up a mirror to what, as you pointed out, Jen, is probably exemplary of second language writing, but it's a combination of the plural issues and then the article the organic issues, just trying to hold up a mirror to the writers of this text that term is causing confusion for me as a reader, and just going to try to dramatize the reason why that matters. this last sentence that just tries to give them a sense of like why this matters. I think one other thing that I'm noticing too as I comment is that the particular strategy of dramatizing the reader, I feel like works best in conversation with offering specific praise, because I feel like offering too many hedges or too many sugaring the pill, saying things, are working pretty well, but that's not a strategy I found to be very effective. And there's actually a famous research study about that with second language writers, about how sugaring the pill does not help second language writers in particular when you give advice like, this is working pretty well, but, and then you offer a lot of criticism. So anyway, so I do feel like, because I know in good faith that I'm going to try to find genuine things about a draft that are working well, I know that I can then be more definitive and critical sometimes when I'm offering feedback elsewhere. And I hope that they both work in conversation with each other, in that students believe my praise more because they see that I'm not just a Pollyanna. I'm not just everybody gets to bat and t-ball type of commenter, but that I am keeping it real, for lack of a better term. Awesome. So it looks like folks are doing some comments, and Judy's shared one. Has anybody else provided a dramatization of the reader? I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. Okay. So Judy, Judy's comment is at the end of this first paragraph. She writes, you've outlined solid direction for your paper. Try more clearly defining your objectives by bulleting the process. One thing, so that I like the suggestion for sure of bulleting the process. One thing I wonder is if in terms of just practicing this, dramatize the reader, if Judy, if you could say a little bit, in this sample, about why the bulleting of the process of the defining the objectives, like what effect that would have for you. And some of the things that, some of my experience with this concept is it does seem like you're kind of stating the obvious, but related to a point that Jen will cover in a second, and obviously something we have all experienced, students aren't necessarily super self-consciously aware of writing and all the things that they do well, or the effects their words have, or fail to do well, and the effects their words have on a reader. So one of the things that dramatizing the reader is trying to do is just sort of really make it what may be implicit to people who are skilled writers, make it explicit and say, if you bullet the process, it would be easier to follow the objectives, or I would be able to read them more clearly, or whatever the case is, whatever you think that the effect that would have on your reading.
I do like, Judy, how you use imperatives there. Try doing something, and I think that gets at your question that you asked before about how do you be really specific. So you're doing two things. Like your first sentence, or first part of the sentence, is an observation, so that's holding up the mirror, and then the second one is an actionable thing, which I appreciate.
Yeah, absolutely. So just in the interest of time, shall we go on, Jen, you think?
Sure. Yeah, so I'll have you navigate back to the handout, and we are going to be talking about our next strategy, which is minimize and prioritize. This gets at Judy's question about how do you deal with balancing writing drafts with the volume of assignments. And this also gets at another question that I had previously in an email that I got about saving time. And I know that one challenge that we face when we are looking at drafts is how to give detailed feedback to the student that's formative and that's useful, but without spending, an hour on a draft.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's not the main reason why I'm advocating minimize and prioritize, but that is an added benefit of minimizing and prioritizing. But the main reason that I'm recommending that you minimize and prioritize your comments is that giving students too many things to do in revising their draft will be overwhelming. It's really hard, especially as this quote from Doug Hesse points out, for students to actually do the prioritizing themselves. So if you say something to a student about their thesis, right, that they really need to work on their thesis, it's not very clear, and then you also correct some of the sentence level language issues that they're having, in their revisions they're much more likely to correct the sentence language things and ignore the thesis comment, which the thesis comment would be more of a global concern, and the sentence issues would be a local concern. It's just easier for them to make those sentence level changes rather than rethink their ideas. And that's really what you want to get at in your comments. That's what I mean by prioritize. You should comment on the global higher order concerns before turning to the sentence level concerns. And we have another handout in our folder that's Bean's, it's the Bean hierarchy chart. It actually gives you a hierarchy for what to focus on first. And the first category there is assignment fulfillment, and then thesis presence, strength of argument, the macro organization, micro organization, then stylistic issues, and then grammar, spelling, and punctuation. And so if you want to make your comments count, minimize them. I would say only focus on 2 to 3 areas for improvement and give concrete suggestions, and then also focus those comments on what's most important.
Yep. Yeah, because there's just, as Jen says, there's just little evidence that they're able to make more than that many changes. And also the Nancy Summers talks about this and other research, John Bean talks about it. We can provide really contradictory feedback sometimes where we tell people to fix sentences but then also get rid of entire paragraphs that those sentences are inside of. And it's really unclear to student writers what's the most important thing to do. So and then in terms of the balancing too, Jen, one of the things that just it seems hard, I think, for some people, but it's literally stopping if you start at the top of the hierarchy and a student does have a bad argument and poor organization, there may not be much more feedback you can provide, or many more topics for suggesting revisions on that particular round.
Yeah, for sure. And so one suggestion is that if a student isn't doing the assignment at all, is to not comment on the draft. Just tell the student you didn't do the assignment. You have to do the assignment, and then you can submit to me.
Yeah, I think that's one of the ways in which I hope that somebody who's watching that frees you up at times, because I would imagine some of us, I know I've done it, have spent the most amount of time detailing just the egregiousness with which somebody has not done an assignment. And John Bean is really saying, let's really not spend time doing that if someone hasn't done what you've asked. And Judy asks, what point do students learn to focus on the mechanics? I think
Judy, we're gonna also talk about mechanics too. We're not going to ignore mechanics at all.
Yeah.
But we're going to focus on that in our last strategy.
And I think the point that Jen's making too, that's really that you're making, Jen, that's related to that is that, you know, while students, many of you may feel like do not have a lot of skills when it comes to mechanics, that's actually what they think of as writing, good writing, or what you should focus on in revising. There's another research study different than the one I cited earlier by Nancy Summers, where she shows that professional writers of all different kinds view revision as an opportunity to really hone in on meaning, to figure out what you've done well thus far, what you haven't done well, to create knowledge as you write, whereas student writers think of it as changing words. There's no amount of words. No thesaurus is going to help someone who hasn't done an assignment or has a weak argument. So I don't think that students focusing on the mechanics is so much the issue as whether they know how to use grammar and style in correct ways. So anyway, I mean, all of that said, Jen absolutely has a lot of really great strategies for giving feedback to students and coaching them to get better at
Yeah.
certain errors.
So on the handout, there's an example of an end comment. So in the previous strategy, when we were talking about dramatizing the reader, we were focusing on marginal comments. But for this one, we are going to focus on an end comment. And in this end comment, I give some praise, which we'll talk about later. But then I just identified 2 areas for improvement. And those are concrete suggestions. And I limit myself to those. So I'm not talking about everything that I see in the paper that I think can be improved, but only the most important aspects.
Absolutely. So
So should we move on to the activity?
yeah, let's do it.
Okay, great. So we want you to go back to the first student draft, the one that you were already working on. So you should have a marginal comment right now that dramatizes the reader. And our activity for this part is to make an end comment on sample student draft 1 about the most impactful revision, right? The one revision that the writer can do. And you can feel free to use Bean's hierarchy to decide on what's the most important area for improvement.
And that's one of the reasons we provided the assignment itself. So you can judge whether this does the assignment or not. And then if so, what else on the hierarchy you would say is most important. All right. I'm going to put my screen up again, Jen, if you want to.
Okay.
Hold on 1 second. There we go. Okay, then I go back here. All right. I just focused on the. I wouldn't say that this assignment for me didn't do the assignment, but there's one part of the assignment I think it fails to do, which is to focus on more than one side of the issue, as far as I could tell. So that's what I think is the most important thing among many things, but that's the most important thing I think that would have the most impact on revising this.
That was what I was going to say, Matthew.
Yeah.
That, this, it didn't seem like they were hitting that part of the assignment requirement of showing multiple perspectives on the issue. They just seemed to be very pro organic farming.
Yeah. Anne asked a good question too, related to the idea. A great question about prioritizing. She asked, do you provide a caveat letting students know you're only commenting on higher priorities? How do you make it clear you're not marking everything? And quite literally, yes, that's the thing to do. And then, again, Jen will be talking about some specific strategies related to error and how to focus on that. So we'll talk about that in a sec, but yeah, those are the most important things at the time. And and again, this is focused on commenting on writing to coach revision on particular products. So yeah, there's a making it really clear that by no means is your summary comment comprehensive about everything going wrong, but the example that Jen provided. And some other samples in the John Bean chapter that you have access to as part of this workshop that we'll open up in a little bit. There are sentences that basically say, the most important things to focus on in your revision are. So you're not making the case that these are the definitive list of everything that needs to be addressed, but these are the most important first step ones.
Okay.
Judy provided her comment here, which is great.
So Judy says, you've clearly done your research on the effects of organic farming. So that even goes into
I know.
The next strategy we'll be talking about, which is giving praise. As you approach your next revision, consider adding specific examples that show the impact of this process. Remember that your detailed paragraph should convince the reader of your point. So it seems like those are two things.
Yeah, absolutely.
2 areas for improvement. And just remember, we're not saying that you should use any of these strategies separately. We are going to do an activity at the end that's putting it all together. So we're not saying don't talk about mechanics, but that's a strategy that we're going to talk about later. And then in the last activity, you'll put everything together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate you saying that. I think sometimes, those of us immersed in research on writing studies, we get pigeonholed as saying that, grammar doesn't matter, but that's not at all what we're saying. So let it not be thought that we think that, because we absolutely think that it's important. We're just trying to provide and then practice 4 strategies and then put it all together. And so Judy's saying she likes the idea of streamlining comments. And this is a cool idea too, choosing a specific tactic on each paper we assign. So a specific, by that I guess I assume the idea that you're providing a lot of feedback on organization on a certain paper, or a lot of feedback on sources and use of sources on another paper, or something like that. That's especially, it sounded like too in Anne, in your course, we have a lot of writing assignments. That could be a cool way of balancing things out, and then one of the things that you're both talking about is foregrounding expectations about your comments with students, so giving them some sense of what you're focusing on, when, and why. So yeah. Okay, so in the interest of time, should we move on to the idea of praise that Judy so awesomely previewed?
Yes.
Excellent. Gold star. Okay, so again, to be a little bit silly, but also to be totally sincere, we are advocating for genuine, specific praise, but not in a way that's Pollyanna-ish, or that's just focused only on empty promises of self-esteem or anything like that. But because, if you go back to the commenting and writing handout, there is a lot of research that says that praise is a strong motivating force in revising writing, and that's true when it's genuine and specific. So students can smell it when it's disingenuous and this is good, but or just super broad, things like that. Judy's example was a great example of specific praise, that they know a lot. And in some of the weakest writing, that is often one of the things you'll praise. If you look at some of the examples there, sometimes students will have earnestly done the reading and have tried their best to engage with it, but haven't done it at the level you want them to. But if they seem to kind of get what the writer is saying, that's a point of specific praise you can offer them. Now, of course, that's not always the case. But then, one of the other things too is just giving them on assignments, if there are assignments for in the courses that you have where students do have a fair amount of freedom, giving them some positive praise on the choices they've made. I think that's also something that can be really effective. It really is about being specific and genuine. And we'll talk in a little bit about John Bean, who's one of the most influential people for putting into practice a lot of research-based ideas that are practical for instructors at the college level. One of the things we'll talk about that he advocates for in his model of what a great summary or end comment does is to try to really force ourselves to always look for something that's working well. And he provides in that book, we don't have time to go over it now, in the book Engaging Ideas and in the chapter that we provided as part of the folder, the resources for today, there's 3 or 4 pages, 3.5 pages or so, that have a lot of really compelling summary of research on how students respond to our comments. And he also references some neurological brain-based research on why some praise isn't. And so anyway, so that's something that I definitely try to do when I comment on student writing, and to try to look for places in which there's a sentence or a reaction to the assignment, something that's working that I can genuinely comment on and encourage someone to do. All right, so I feel like this would be a good chance to practice it, to go to the activity, adding on to the end comment. Judy's already completed the assignment. But people want to think about something, one piece of genuine specific praise you can add to the end comment on the first student sample. Anything else you want to add, Jen?
When you mentioned the brain research that Bean talks about, and if you go into your folder, the shared folder, you'll see that the chapter is in there. We do have Todd Zakharajek coming in for the Teaching and Learning Conference this year.
Mm-hmm.
He'll be talking a lot about brain research and specifically student motivation. So if those are topics that interest you, you should check that out. I'm just doing a quick plug for an upcoming event.
Yeah. No, but it's true. That's great. So yeah, I'm gonna look, and if folks want to follow along, go back to your student sample 1, and then look for something you can add to the end comment that's a piece of genuine praise. And we already have the example from Judy about praising the research that these students have clearly done. So I mean, yeah, I think one of the things that's related to Judy's praise of their awareness of the research is that struck me is just how they've connected it to what people advocates of organic farming, what they've connected it to the they effectively summarized the positive impacts that these folks claim it has, that organic farming has on both the environment and people's health. So, like, there's a so what. They get why it matters. It isn't just it's clear that they see that there's like interconnectedness to why people who advocate for organic farming are doing so, and beyond just it for just farming itself. So that I thought that was impressive. How about you, Jen? What did you like?
I think, just even as the person who was assigned this, I would use some of the language of the class. I use moves analysis a lot with multilingual writers, which is, you look at a genre and you look at the moves that are typically made in that genre. And so I kind of tying in with what you said, Matthew, and what Judy said, the student makes all the right moves, right?
Yeah.
They do that, the summary, and then they have that separate move in that I think the last paragraph of why does this matter?
Right. That's cool.
That. So I think that, the moves are there.
Yeah. That's cool. So you're able to offer genuine praise on more organizational, genre-based things, which is that's great. So hopefully the handout and then the few things we've talked about offer some examples on how to do that. We'll talk in a second about John Bean's suggestions for how to put it all together, and he does suggest putting it first, and I take that advice. So when I write an end comment, as Judy did, her small comment is a great example of the bigger one, which is to start off with the praise, and to then focus on suggestions for making it better. And one of the other things too, just the last thing I'll say about genuine specific praise is I try, based on some research about sugaring the pill that I referenced earlier by Highland and Highland, I try really hard to make my praise purely praiseful. So to end sentences and to not have hedged sentences where I'm saying, I really liked how much research you got, but your sources were lacking, or something like that. So to me, that just wouldn't ring as true for me as a commenter as I would probably not offer that as a point of praise, because if I can't say it without qualifying it, it doesn't feel genuine. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Matthew. And sometimes I forget to do that. I forget that hedging, it doesn't really count maybe for the student if you start with a piece of praise and then end the sentence with a suggestion for a revision.
Right.
But I do want to
go ahead, please.
Connect this question and this strategy of offering specific praise to a question that we had about online learning. I know that somebody watching last week said that she was interested in how specifically this applies to online teaching, and I think that the praise, for me, speaks a lot to the online teaching because you're not able to establish a personal connection with students as easily online as you are in person. That's one of the biggest challenges of online teaching.
That's a good point.
And so providing that specific praise allows you to encourage students in a way that, you could do it in class, right, by validating what they say or through smiling and being a physical presence, but this is one of your few opportunities to really encourage students.
Yeah, and Judy, I think, offers a sort of humorous take on praise being a PR move. You make student feel good about what he or she is doing before you offer ways to improve. And whether, not to be too not to overanalyze it too much, it really doesn't matter how you frame it. A PR move, it could feel like that, but it could be the case that it's a PR move with a lot of actual brain-based research supporting it, in that you are setting up a student, you're opening them up to hearing more negative feedback, but then you're also giving them motivating revision. For example, one of the things that Bean talks about in the 3 pages I cited is students, if the comments seem overly critical and there's no praise, students are more likely to feel like just wholesale their draft is not worthy, and there's no chance of ever changing it in a way that would make you as an instructor like it. So for whatever reason or however you frame it, it just really is the case that you know, a little bit of genuine praise can lead towards motivating revision. And you know, again, in a really practical sense, not just in a self-esteem type way, but in a way of making the difference between someone being willing to try to make changes that are impactful and, you know, blowing it off and just saying, screw it. So.
Yeah, and Matthew, I know that in a previous iteration of this workshop, you showed video clips of students who were talking about the comments that they got and how it made them feel.
Right.
I feel like that would be a good thing to share, but I'm not sure where to find the URL.
Oh, we can put it. I don't know. It's on YouTube, I think. It actually comes from a Nancy Summers piece. Maybe we can pop it into the Q&A while we're doing some work later. Does that sound good?
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so and Anne says, yeah, there are times when I hedge. I hear you. I mean, it's not so much of a judgment thing of being bad or good. It's, you know, the research on hedging does come in the context mainly of second language writers, but you know, one of the jokes I've often made, or one of the sort of tragic comic discussions I've had with some instructors about this topic is when you do hedge, you run the risk of either having the super diligent students only look at the criticism in the sentence. So, you know, I really liked your paper a lot. I enjoyed reading it, but this, you know, so the really diligent students only focus on the negative half of the sentence, and then the students who probably need to, you know, hear that second half of the sentence more may only focus on the positive parts. Oh, she loved it, you know. So I think that's one of the reasons why I have taken to trying to discipline myself to separate those two comments, just because I feel like it at least in my from my input, I feel like it's a good faith effort to try to make that, you know, happen less frequently, for people to either only focus on the negative or only focus on the positive. So. All right, so you want to talk about the last set of strategies on marking?
Yeah, so I'm going to talk about error now, and the treatment of error. And these recommendations have to do with research on the best ways to, or the most effective ways to comment on error, and then also with this idea of saving time in mind too. And I advocate that you use minimal marking. In a study by Richard Haswell, he, instead of actually correcting students' errors, just put an X in the margin of a line where there was an error, and he found that students were able to find within that line and correct their error 61% of the time, which means that often these errors are made out of carelessness, and that students are just don't have time or haven't learned effective editing and proofreading strategies. So one thing that we are suggesting that you try is to make writers responsible for finding and fixing their own errors. And there's even research done by Dana Ferris, who's pretty big in applied linguistics and second language writing, that says that indirect feedback on error, so that would be like the minimal marking, not explicitly saying what the error was and fixing it, but just indicating that an error was made, is actually preferable to correcting the error, like crossing things out, because this asks the students to, in their revision, to find and make that change, and so learning can happen in that situation, whereas when they're just copying what your corrections are, they're not actually doing the mental work of figuring out, oh, why is this wrong and how would I change it? So the indirect feedback is usually better than direct feedback. Another thing when it comes to marking errors is that you could focus on, rather than marking every error, just focusing on those that impede meaning, those that cause genuine confusion. And so I came up with this list of 5 minimalist approaches to marking error. And the first one here is mark 1 or 2 errors that appear multiple times throughout the paper, provide a link to a resource that explains how to fix the error. You could use Purdue OWL or Grammar Girl. And this is a strategy that I typically use with second language students as a way for them to make progress. It's important in these classes for them to work on the sentence level aspects of their writing. And when I focus on just errors that reappear, they can and tell them how to fix it one time. They can use that strategy to actively revise and edit the rest of their paper. A second thing you could do is to just highlight, underline, or circle all of the errors. If you use Google Documents, you can do this by highlighting. If you use Microsoft Word, you can do the same thing. And then obviously when you're just writing on a paper, it's pretty easy. And keep in mind that most writers will be able to identify and fix the majority of those errors. The third thing is very similar to the second, is rather than marking all of the errors, to place an X at the end of the line or a check mark. And that's even giving the student more responsibility to find the error. The fourth one is only marking errors that impede meaning, and you can couple this with marginal comments that explain how you're confused. And that's another approach to, getting at the sentence level aspects of writing without only focusing on those. And then the last one, this is something that I haven't done but I've heard about, is editing only one paragraph or passage of the paper and then asking the writer to use that as a springboard for editing the rest of their own paper.
It's a tried and true strategy in the Writing Center where we try to teach a skill that they can apply elsewhere and then to see in real time. So maybe a parallel situation might be if you have any time to conference with students or if they're coming to your office. That's a good way to, if you ask somebody, hey, does that make sense, my explanation of there versus there, they're either going to feel like they have to tell you yes because they want you to feel good about your explanation or because they're embarrassed because they don't understand it. But being able to see it in real time, have them apply it, I think is sometimes super helpful. And I also think too, this is again anecdotal, but that last suggestion, I've certainly found that ironically, the highest level writers I've worked with can really benefit from something like that because deep editing on a particular paragraph might actually be modeling for them. They can see how the edits you might make, the tweaks you might make, how they make their writing better, and then are able to find it elsewhere. So I don't know of any evidence that bears that out other than my own experience.
So I'm just going to quickly jump in and address some of the comments. So Judy said that she really wants to watch the video. Allie has been able to find it, so there's a link on YouTube that is in the Q&A feature. You should be able to find that. Thank you, Allie, for finding that for us. And let's see, Anne says, towards the second half of the term, I highlight errors with color coding. Then I ask that they correct it and add a comment on why it was wrong. However, since I teach online, I've had a challenge trying to describe what I'm expecting from them. And I guess the rest of the question is, how should you communicate your expectations for their writing? So I would say that maybe it's easier for you to describe this assignment in class in person, but maybe if you wrote it out in a step-by-step form, along with a justification, have it be sort of its own homework assignment, and actually ask students to upload their corrected and commented version. That might be a good way of clarifying your expectations. Do you think that answers the question, Matthew?
Yeah, I definitely do.
Okay. So thank you for that question, Anne. All right. So let's go ahead and move to the activity.
Sounds great.
And the activity is to go back to that same draft that you've been working with for the previous strategies. That's the draft number 1, and to choose one of these minimal marking strategies and to apply that. So
Excellent.
whichever one you want. The X one would be a little hard because you can't really write in the margins, but you can also just highlight the entire line and then put an X if you'd like to do it that way.
Excellent.
All right, so I'm going to interrupt you. I know that you're working on applying your strategies, but we do have a question from Judy. She says, I love these minimalist strategies. How do you make the students accountable for fixing them without having to grade the paper twice? And I would say that these are great strategies to use when you already expect students will revise their paper. Usually I don't grade the first draft of a student's paper and I just provide formative comments, but I'll give them credit for submitting a complete assignment, that it's the full length, and that it's on time. So that's one way to do it, but another way to do it is to actually have time in class once you pass back papers, or if you tell students to bring a hard copy of your version, the draft with your comments on it, to class and give them time to find the errors in class and fix them. And then that way, if they have a question of, wait, I don't see the error here, what's going on, they can either turn to a peer or they can raise their hand and ask you.
Indeed. And then another thing that, I think this works for lots of making revision more efficient for lots of contexts, but this as well is having students turn in some sort of letter or brief checklist with a revised draft where they're claiming, they're saying what they've done, and then that just, I think, focuses your work to sort of confirm if that's the case, that it also just forces them to be reflective in the process of doing their revisions, which is very good pedagogy and good practice for them.
One assignment that I've used that was pretty interesting was I had students listen to audio comments. I tried audio comments out with second language writers, and I was worried that they wouldn't be able to hear what I was saying in the audio comment, that they would have some trouble just following me. And so I had them write down what in writing what I had suggested that they do to their draft. And that was a good assignment because it had them summarize what my comments were, and it also gave me an idea of how they were prioritizing my comments. And so I was seeing that they were definitely prioritizing the sentence level feedback I was giving them, and sometimes ignoring the bigger picture feedback I was giving them. So it seems like we have some more comments.
Cool. I'm trying to do the activity.
I'll give you a couple of minutes of uninterrupted work.
Yeah, and then we'll definitely be getting to all the comments, and we'll have some time to put it all together. So Jen, I tried to, in our limited time, I tried to combine a couple, provide a link to something about article usage, and then prioritize that in the first paragraph. So maybe like another minute, Jen. Does that sound good?
Sure, that sounds great.
Okay. Okay, so if people have questions about that, please chime in. You want to take a couple questions before we transition?
Sure. Judy says, so maybe fewer assignments are more productive in getting students to be better writers. Multiple drafts would teach them the value of editing. I definitely agree. Yeah, I think that fewer assignments that are really focused on revision and the process that's a good approach. Especially if you care a lot about having a nice polished final draft, it's important to build in those steps. I know that Anne said something similar, or no, Karen, she said, do you feel that they try hard enough on the first draft? I think that, oh, sorry. I think that students, it's not that they don't try, it's just that maybe they're doing it at the last minute and that they don't they don't build in the time to do editing and proofreading, or even time to really think about their ideas or talk through their ideas with another person. That's why doing so many drafts can really benefit students and help them come up with and develop a really strong final product.
Absolutely. And I think, too, to sort of reiterate what I said earlier, if learning about the process or engaging in the process of writing to making it more like how actual writers write is important learning goal for you, then fewer assignments with more drafts is helpful. And I do think that I understand your concern, Karen, about the earlier drafts. I know a lot of instructors who are pretty successful talk about just defining the term complete draft, all that kind of stuff. And then I do think that surprisingly, one of the most correlated things with improvement as a writer is reflection on one's writing, and that's true both as in the big picture, one's development over time as a writer, but also in terms of actual like revising a particular draft. So what a lot of instructors will do is, and this relates to something I said a little bit ago, is have students turn in a cover letter with an assignment where they've made the case for what their first draft did, and then what changes they made for what reason on their second draft. So feedback from you, feedback from peer review, feedback from a peer writing tutor, whatever the case may be. So, I think that kind of documentation and making them explicitly reflect on what they did initially, why they changed what they changed, what effect they think it had, all that kind of stuff. I think those steps are important, and they actually don't necessarily mean you have to do any more work. You have to build in more revision, but you don't necessarily have to look super closely at those cover letters. You can, I think, use them often. What I think a lot of instructors do is use them when a final draft isn't up to snuff, and you can kind of see, well, what claims is this writer making about their process or their revisions, and what inputs did they have, what peer review did they get, what feedback did I give them on a draft, and to see if they took any of the advice that they received. So anyway.
There's another great question here that I want to address from Judy, and
yeah.
This has to do with what we were just focusing on, which was the minimalist strategies for marking error. She asks, we have a particular challenge in helping non-native English speakers to write. In the sample you provide, the awkward tense alone makes this paper hard to read. Do you have suggestions for dealing with them, which are the non-native English speakers? I love working with non-native English speakers, and so I'm really excited about this question. I would say that non-native English speakers, you can never expect them to lose sort of the accent that they have in their written in their writing, and that it's not. I'm not sure, and Matthew, we'll see what you think, if it's fair to hold them to the exact same standards in terms of having a really clean sounding, in terms of language, a draft. But I think it is helpful for these students, particularly, to focus on patterns of error, because different populations of students will have different kinds of language errors.
Right.
And it will be helpful for you to help mark those for them.
Right, and then also I think you provided the example in the handout of applying some of the same standards to prioritizing error in second language writers as we do with our non-native English writers, as we do with any writers, and that the example 4 in minimalist marking, when there's errors that impede meaning, the audience was feeling bored or that they are boring to others, that's a big difference. The audience was boring, the audience was bored. Those are things that you can expect a writer, no matter what, to know what their meaning is, and then ask them to correct that. And then there may be things like, I think you're saying, like article usage that are super challenging based on people's native languages, where there may not be similar structures in people's native languages. But prioritizing errors that impede meaning, I think that we should basically apply similar standards across the board. But I completely agree that there are certain things, if it's a repeated error that doesn't impede meaning, I am completely comfortable holding a student who grew up speaking a different language to a different standard than a native English speaker. And then that's just about, I think, being explicit about that, as Anne was asking earlier about commenting strategies in general. Okay, so we'll address the issue that Anne raised about verbal or audio comments. We'll address that near the end. And then we did want to give people a chance to put things all together. So shall we do that now, Jen?
Yeah.
So on page 6 of the handout, we've pretty much talked about this already. That's where the activity is listed. We're going to now open the second student sample draft, sample student draft 2, and put all the above strategies into practice. We'll have a decent amount of time to do it, probably What do you think, like 20 minutes?
Yeah, let's do 20 minutes. And I do want to just jump in quickly and say that just in order for us to keep track of who's participating in this workshop, it's really helpful if you either submit a question at some point or if you make some kind of change to your document,
Right.
either one of the drafts, just so we know that you're there and that you participated.
Yeah, that's awesome. So on the page 6, Bean provides we provided a quote from John Bean about the all intents and purposes a template. It does address some of the issues, Judy, that you asked about earlier in the more global level. So starting with strengths, talking about the summary of the number of problems, and then recommendations for revisions. So I think, what I like about that is that I think sometimes there's a tendency to conflate the summary of problems and the recommendations for revisions. There's John Bean provides a great example on page 334 in that chapter we provided you if you want to take a look at that at all. But just to push yourself to talk about, so this is what's working well, this is what's not working well, and here are the recommendations for revision. And I think that's where you can really coach students to focus on the things you think are most important. And that's what's cool about it. I mean, that goes to the point that Jen was making earlier. In number 3, recommendations for revision, that's where you put your stamp on what are the most important things for a student to succeed on this particular assignment. So, we've obviously provided the hierarchy from Bean, but we are not saying that that's, orthodox. We're saying that's where you get a chance to really tell students what the most important things they can do to make the paper better. So anyway, the example is a sample from one of my classes a few years ago. It's an argument-based assignment. The assignment is listed on the first page. Basically, the Amethyst Initiative was a group of 100 university presidents who came together to argue that the drinking age should be lowered to 18. Their argument was, and these were like, big-time university presidents, their argument was that there's too much, drinking on the down low in colleges, too many students pre-gaming, drinking excessively too quickly before they go out, or doing things in secret, and that it's better if it's in more public contexts. And so I asked students to take a stand on that topic. Not surprisingly, almost every student thought it was an awesome idea. But the point of assessing their work was to see how well they could marshal arguments in favor of their position, and then also address specifically the arguments against their position. And so the draft that we provided you has probably the best title of a paper ever. It's called War But No Beer, ? And the student makes an impassioned argument for why the drinking age should be lowered. How successful he was, well, we'll leave that to you to decide. So we'll spend about 20 minutes, or spend about, at this point, till quarter till, looking at that, trying to provide some marginal comments and some summary comments. And last thing I'll say, I don't know what your approach is, Jen, but I have done both marginal comments as I read first, then summary comments, and sometimes I've pushed myself for various reasons to try to provide a summary comment first and then go back and add marginal comments that provide specific examples of the more general suggestions I'm providing. So do you have a particular approach?
Yeah, I usually try to do the second approach, which is to do the end comment first. I try to not comment on things because I realize that's where I lose some time.
Yes.
Because I'll comment on too many things and I'll realize, wait, that's not the most important thing, and I'll actually go back and delete it.
Right.
I find myself doing that, and because I usually am working in some kind of digital form.
Right.
If it's audio comments or if it's text comments that I can delete really easy, because I don't want to write too many things to the student because I don't want to confuse them. So I'd rather, even if I spent 5 minutes commenting on something, I'll delete those comments because I think it's more important to say, okay, what's the most important thing first, and then go back.
Yeah.
And then same thing, usually since I'm doing the marking patterns of error, I kind of wait until I get at least halfway through to decide what the patterns of error are that I will mark.
Sounds good. All right, so feel free to put on some, music or whatever you want to do in your own environment. We'll spend until quarter till, and then we'll touch base and we'll share any uh, examples people have at that point, or any questions folks have in 15 minutes. All right. Doing just some notes at the bottom as I'm reading. Obviously, I've read this before, but it's just a few notes to myself for things that seem important. And as we said in our last workshop, feel free to peek into either Jen or my sample student draft if you're wondering what we're doing, or feel free to ask us to peek into yours if you want any specific feedback on what you're doing. A few more minutes. And we'll share, talk this through. See if you can, as we're running short on time, or I am at least, see if you can, if there's definitely some issues I'd like to raise in my second paragraph in the end comment, but I'm realizing I'm going to just leave it with the first issue I raised, and then I'm going to try to write in the third paragraph a suggestion for how to address that issue. So in other words, I'm not going to just list all of the problems, but at least give one suggestion for addressing the one problem I have somewhat clearly articulated at this point. All right, maybe another minute and then we'll share. Okay, Jen. So, anybody else, Anne or Judy or Karen or anybody else that's out there, if you want to let us know what things you found to praise, to define as a problem or problems or suggestions for revision, that would be great. What did you observe, Jen, as you looked at it?
So I wasn't quite done. I was taking a long time because I was looking at questions and things like that. But
Sure.
In my comment, I haven't quite finished it yet, but I will say that this student did a great job of taking a stance, right? That
Mm-hmm.
was one of the three moves that they were supposed to do, make a
Mm-hmm.
plan for how to proceed in the face of the issue at hand,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very clear that they wanted the law to change.
Right.
So they're taking a stand against the law forbidding any citizen to consume alcohol under the age of 21. So at least, their thesis
Yeah.
was very clear, and I see that they're addressing the other perspectives, and that was
Mm-hmm.
part of the third move,
Yeah.
referencing the texts that make competing claims, and so they do speak to like the two sides of the issue. And so they do a good job of doing that.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think I would have them focus on is specifically, I would say that I'm not quite convinced, um, and I would point to a couple of places, right? That's the move to, why this should be the best way to proceed. I feel like specifically, um, in their paragraph about, um, another point in favor of them is, how people can be in the military but they can't drink yet.
Right.
In that paragraph, he talks about President Obama, and he kind of assumes that the audience is pro-Obama.
Right.
But in
Right.
in that instance, he kind of lost me as a reader. I think if we're talking about dramatizing the reader, I would say, if I'm not pro-Obama, then I might not be as behind you on this specific point. And
Right.
I think I would maybe make a couple of comments about where he lost me
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
terms of convincing me to believe something.
Yeah. Absolutely. And Judy's got the beginning of her final comment posted, and I mean that's exactly what I said too. Authentically, the passion in this paper, perhaps most succinctly summarized, and I think humorously so by the title, "War but No Beer." The incredulity inherent in that stance that the writer's taking. The writer's super passionate about this. I mean, this is not in my comment, but so passionate that the logical leaps throughout are quite astounding. Jen, you just pointed to one, but one of the things that that I feel like with this is that pointing out, and it's not so much a hedge, but when I was writing my commentary, I was saying exactly what you just said. You did the assignment. You did the part of the assignment that asked you to take a stand, and that's super clear. You literally have a sentence that repeats that phrase, "take a stance against." The one thing that they didn't do, though, was frame it in terms of the Amethyst Initiative. And to your point about what they did well in terms of the other side, it's so focused on refuting the other side that it's not even super clear what the Amethyst Initiative believes or why it believes what it believes. So anyway, that was my suggestion for that was my main suggestion following that thread through, is going back to the documents from these 100 university presidents and bringing in paraphrasing or citation quotes from them, and what are their arguments for why this should be the case, because I think that kind of expansion would help a lot, and also would help the writer avoid the logical leaps, like just because traffic fatalities have been reduced because of the 21 drinking law, but there's a plateau in the success of that, so therefore it's somehow not a good idea. It's just sort of a bizarre logical leap. So
Do we want to address some of these questions?
yeah, sure. Yeah.
Or do we want to look at another sample?
No. This is great. I mean, I think that the most of Judy's comment got cut off because of maybe a character limit, but you can see that she's already starting to do the real hands-on suggestions, and giving some real concrete strategies for the writer to use, like reading aloud, and so that's exactly the kind of things we're talking about doing, whether it's as Judy said earlier, PR or motivating revision, but just really trying to start with in the end comment with praise and problems, and then suggestions for revision. And I don't know with this one, Jen, I don't know what your approach would be. I might add one or two marginal comments in it if I had more time, but not that many. I mean, I would maybe go back and point out places where the logical leaps were just too much for me to take, but because this writer does the assignment in terms of going back to Bean's hierarchy, but then also sort of fails to do that crucial aspect. I mean, in some ways it's similar to the sample that you gave us, where yes, in good faith you can say that this writer has done the assignment, but also has really avoided one part of the assignment, which is really bringing in the Amethyst Initiative in this case, or in the case of your assignment, really focusing on both sides of the organic farming debate and all that. So anyway, so I mean, that's by far the most important thing, is to make it clearer to readers what that organization believes, and then also marshaling, because I would imagine that their reasons for lowering the drinking age are better than the ones that you mentioned about, like President Obama, like that have been more successful to more audience, more readers. So let's address the comments. We have a few more minutes here.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and address a comment by Anne. Anne asks, basically I'm going to summarize because it's sort of broken up over a couple of different comments. When we give students comments on a draft, and those comments, even if they are implemented, would not lead to an A paper, what do we do?
Right.
So we might say for one of the papers, oh, well, you need to address the amethyst initiative more in this paper. But even if they did that, if that's our one area of improvement or two areas of improvement, and they do that, they still won't get an A because they maybe have some sentence level issues or structure issues, organization issues.
Right.
I think that's a good question. I think that for learning to happen, students can really only focus on a couple of things in a draft at a time. And if that means that they only get one chance to revise, then their grade will go up from maybe a C to a B if it started at in the C range to go to the B range. I don't think that Matthew, do you think it's possible to really always expect that students are going to get A's, or that your comments should lead to an A paper?
No. I think that's. I mean, I think Anne's asking really good questions about that. Not all, but many of them fall under the category of really kind of previewing what revision and what your comments, like the role it plays in your class and what kinds of things they can expect. So we're kind of getting out in front of that, managing expectations. One thing I will say that I read a really comprehensive study of the role of grades in revision done by the Educational Testing Service, out of New Jersey. And one of the things they found that was surprising is that basically, if you want to motivate revision on a piece of writing, the worst thing you can do is put a grade on it. That in all contexts, whether it was a low grade or a high grade, putting a grade on an assignment or a draft of an assignment they did a study with a bunch of different conditions, a bunch of different treatment groups, but they found that putting a grade on a draft would almost always lead to the least amount of revisions or the least total revision. So especially for Anne's context, where students have some choice, that may be a factor in terms of like why some of them choose to revise and some of them don't. But if anyone's considering either you're already doing an assignment where there's a draft and there's a final draft, or you're thinking about implementing that, one thing I will say related to that point is just trying to avoid putting a grade on it, because that's probably going to shut things down. For example, one of the things the study found is some students are perfectly fine with a C. So, you know what I mean? Like, oh, great, all right, I'm good. Whereas if it's more about teaching them to do the particular work of the assignment, you can do that without giving them a grade. But I mean, it's not that we don't recognize that tension, but I think previewing it a little bit too is important as just in general, and then making it clear that you're trying to have each person go as far as they can. I mean, I think the same thing applies almost to the high-level students, that they need to be pushed too, past wherever they are. They may come in with all the skills necessary, but I think it's also, I mean, sometimes they're the most fun students to teach, but we can have them get a little bit better too. So.
Okay, we do have a couple more questions, and I do want to address them.
Yeah.
One question that I want to go back to, I believe it was Anne that asked about the audio comments.
Right.
So I have used iAnnotate, which is an iPad app, but you can also use the D2L has a feature where you can upload an audio comment to a draft. You can do it that way. I do it within a PDF document, and so it's sort of like a text comment, but it's just an audio comment. So there's an end audio comment where I summarize in 1 minute or less the revisions that I want to see, and then I can also do marginal comments. And then at the same time, I like the PDF, embedding the audio comments in a PDF, because then I can also mark errors.
Right.
Use the minimal marking.
And that's something too, that strikes me. One of the things that Jen and I do when we're not running, Google Hangout workshops, is work with our colleague Joe Olivier on the Teaching Commons website. So that's something maybe we can try to put together some more resources on, and put it up there at some point this quarter. Trying to get just some links to some tried and true tools, I annotate and other things. I do know that some people have said students report listening to those audio comments a lot. Like a couple people I've talked to have said that their students love them. They listen to them on the L. They weren't totally sure that students were necessarily implementing them anymore, but students were saying that they really dug getting audio comments. So interesting.
Yeah, and some people actually do screencasts too, so that way you can have a visual as you're speaking, and it could be a mini video that students watch.
Yeah, sounds good. Awesome. So, yeah, wrapping up, anything else we want to talk about?
I think Judy had a question about, she still feels that commenting takes a long time.
Yeah.
Maybe even longer with our strategies. So this is an important question of how do you get that time down? How do you make it worthwhile? I think that if you don't want to give comments on a draft, there are alternatives. If you have a class of 50 people and you have 5 assignments throughout the quarter, that's a lot of responding to writing. And so in those cases, I think that you can still give students feedback on their writing, detailed feedback on their writing, and help justify a grade if you use a rubric, an analytic rubric. And encircle things, and then maybe just write one sentence about, or 2 sentences, 1 sentence about something that was strong, and then 1 sentence with 1 area for improvement. So that's one strategy. I think that it does. Commenting does take time, but with the minimal marking and with minimizing your feedback, that those are helpful strategies.
No, it really is true, and I think that the more I put into practice the research-based practices that we advocated for today, and including the important point you made, Jen, about your own process, I do find that reading a paper, diagnosing it as I'm reading it, knowing that I have a fair amount of expertise, especially if I wrote the assignment, and then trying to write that summary comment first saves a ton of time. Because, just one example, there's so many times I'll write a marginal comment about what a student could or should have done. They end up doing it elsewhere in the paper, and if I had read the whole paper through, I could have said, hey, that part in that, in the last paragraph, I really expected it to be in the second paragraph, so consider moving it there. So anyway, we should probably wrap up here just to make sure that we're not keeping everyone over time. But Corbin Sanchez asked about referring students to the Writing Center if there are more than 3 areas of concern in the paper. I said this last time. Absolutely, and one of the things that can help us the most, or help the peer writing tutors at the Writing Center the most, is when you provide, again, no obligation to provide detailed comments on it, but if you can give writers a diagnostic sense of what they need to work on, that can really help peer writing tutors focus their work. So they can, and then also if you can make the case to your students for considering, in the case where they need a lot of work, considering standing appointments, regular appointments with a peer writing tutor, that can go a long way, where they can actually do they can do a lot of writing assignment-based work, but then if there are weeks in between when there are assignments due, the peer writing tutor can try to create little modules for learning certain skills. So that's something to think about. And the more information your students have when they come to the Writing Center about themselves as writers, or even their deficiencies, that's super helpful for peer writing tutors. But anyway, I really want to thank everyone for being involved today. It was super fun, and I hope you learned something, and we definitely are interested in feedback, right, Jen?
Oh yeah, I'm going to send everybody an email with a link to an evaluation. Let us know how the workshop was for you, what your experience was like, areas for improvement. This is only our second online workshop, so we really appreciate any feedback that you can give us, any formative feedback.
We'll take it.
Thank you so much for coming today, and if you have follow-up questions with us, you can always contact either Matthew or me and we'll work with you on implementing these strategies or maybe exploring different technologies for commenting on writing.
Absolutely. All right. Thank you, Jen, for putting it all together.
All right. See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.